Hello, everybody. We'll get started in just a moment. I want to give everybody a chance to get their audio preferences settled before we begin. All right, this seems like a pretty good critical mass. So I'll make sure that I type this out for people that joined a little bit late, but welcome to today's webinar. Before we begin, I just want to cover a few technical things if you haven't joined us for one of these before, or if you've never used Zoom webinar before. It works very similar to Zoom meeting, but the big difference is that your cameras and microphones are disabled by default. So you don't need to worry about interrupting us or being seen. But that does mean that you're limited to chat functions if you want to interact with the panel or with each other. The first and most familiar is the chat function itself. If you use that, you'll just have to make sure that you select everyone from the drop-down menu if you want everyone to see your message. Otherwise, only the host and panelists will see whatever you've written. So that's great for discussion or general comments. But if you have a question for the panel, we're going to ask that you use the Q&A function. You just press Q&A. You can ask those questions anonymously. You can view existing questions. You can like them, and you can add your own comments to them. We'll encourage you to ask questions as they come up. Just go ahead and put those in there, but we will not answer them until we've gone through all of the presentation material. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to Julia Finocchi, today's moderator.
Great, thanks so much, Michael. We appreciate you all being here and we welcome you to this webinar. I'd just like to start by sharing something. Somebody had asked why we didn't just do a webinar on Ukraine. And the answer to that is that we have been doing an education and crisis series. This is actually the fourth webinar in that series. We did Lebanon and Afghanistan this fall. And we were planning on this webinar back in January, and we were going to do Venezuela and Myanmar. And then about late January, early February, I said, I think we should do Ukraine. I think something's going on and we need to do Ukraine. And I think, it might be just something to think about. So we changed to Ukraine, and that was back in late January, early February. Obviously, things have changed massively and they continue to change hour to hour, day to day. So what we're giving you here is we're going over Ukraine, and we hope you really find it useful and helpful in your struggle to sort of deal with everything that's going on. But we've also got a couple of other resources we'll share at the end about further presentations on Ukraine. So without further ado, I want to start us off with a poll. Michael, are you ready to do the poll? Great. So just a quick poll. We'd like to just know who's here, where you're joining us from. And so our first question is, where are you joining us from? Are you from an institution, evaluation service, a government organization? Pick one of those. And have you watched previous education and crisis webinars? Yes, no, or you don't recall. We'll give you about 20 seconds to just answer those, and then we'll read those out for the recording. Looks like we got a good number here, about 130 of you on.
No Jeopardy music for
sorry.
American joiners here. All right, we'll close it out.
Okay. Excellent. About 64 of you that voted are from an institution, 59%. 36 or 33%, 1/3 of you are from an evaluation service, and 9 of you are from a government organization. And we're glad to see that 24 out of you, almost a quarter of you, have watched the previous education and crisis webinars. 68 of you, or 62%, have said no, and the rest don't recall. Just for your information, those webinars are recorded and can be accessed from our website. All right, we'll go ahead and close that. All right, now let me introduce our presenters. We are very fortunate in who we were able to bring on for this webinar. Our first presenter will be Ana Villavicencio. Ana is the Education USA Regional Educational Advising Coordinator for South America. That includes the Andean region, Western and Northern South America. Ana has been with Education USA and is based in Quito, Ecuador. As I said, she manages the Andean region portfolio, which consists of Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Venezuela. And she provides training and support to over 40 advisors in 39 Educational USA advising centers. Before she became a REAC, she was a senior Education USA advisor at the Fulbright Commission in Quito, Ecuador. Prior to working for Education USA, Ana was the International Relations Advisor for Cenacit, a government institution in Ecuador that oversees the country's higher education and scientific development. Ana has also worked for a US think tank as a program officer, managing programs on increasing US-Asia strategic relations. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in International Relations and Environmental Studies, a Master's in Political Science, and an MPA from US universities. Also joining us is my good colleague, David Mahali. He's been a professional evaluator of international education credentials since July of 1987. He currently serves as Assistant Director of International for the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers, so with me. He is a member of TICEP, the Association for International Credential Evaluation Professionals, has contributed to various publications published by ACRO, NASA, and is a co-author of the ECE Presents volume, The Educational System of Spain. And finally, Tatiana McKenna, who is from the Ukraine and she's an evaluator for Educational Credential Evaluators, Inc. She's been with ECE as an evaluator since 2008. As I said, she's a native of Ukraine, and her global areas of expertise include the former Soviet Union, the Baltic states, and Germany. As an evaluator, Tatiana has presented at several domestic and international conferences. Welcome and thank you all for being here. Now let's get started. I'm going to turn it on over to Ana, who's going to start us off with Venezuela.
Thank you, Julia. So next slide. There you go. So before I dig deep into Venezuela, I would like to just briefly mention Education USA for those of you that are not familiar with the program. So Education USA is a network of advising centers all over the world sponsored by the State Department. And our mission is to promote US higher education. We work with international students and help them in their application process and selection of institutions. We work with US higher education institutions in their internationalization efforts. And we also engage with local education institutions and governments, helping them as well connect to US institutions. So I invite you to visit our Education USA website. You can see the link there, where you will find a lot of other resources that will be helpful for your work. Next slide. But I would like to highlight one of the resources that you can find there on our website. And this is the Student Mobility Facts and Figures documents that we produce for all the countries where we operate. So we operate in over 170 countries, and you can find these two-page documents with information. The first page focuses on student mobility and some highlights of what we see on the ground. And then the second page on the education system in that specific country. Next slide. As I mentioned, we have a network of advising centers. We actually have over 460 centers worldwide with over 500 advisors. And then in the case of Venezuela specifically, we have 7 centers with 7 advisors. 3 of our centers are located in Caracas, and you can see our lovely advisors from Caracas in the picture. And we are also in Lecheria, Maracaibo, Mérida, and Valencia. So we are spread all over the country, making sure that we can help students as much as possible and be accessible to them. We do work with students mainly through individual and group advising services, as I mentioned, just guiding them through their process. We also conduct extensive outreach to local institutions in the city and also outside the cities in the region. And we also conduct some more specific special programming. We are very active on social media, so I invite you to follow specifically our Instagram account for Venezuela, which is very active, and we try to connect this way with our audiences. Next slide. Now, talking about the current education landscape in Venezuela, and I'm going to share with you some information that we see on the ground. We see that majority of institutions are trying to return to in-person education. Some schools are continuing to do some hybrid education, alternating between in-person some days and then virtual other days, just because of security measures. But in general, there's a push to try to return to in-person services, especially because in Venezuela, there's been several challenges with 100% virtual. Venezuela is a country that suffers a lot from power outages and very poor internet connectivity, which makes it very, very hard for students to have constant access to their education in a virtual manner. So definitely, at least when it's in person, the teacher's there and students are there. Even if there's no electricity, you can continue on. The challenges to Venezuelans' education sector began before COVID-19. It's been several years where we've seen a deterioration on the quality of education available to students. This is no surprise to you that Venezuela has a lot of political and economic challenges that create an environment that's not ideal for a student. One example that I'd like to highlight, for example, is the migration that has taken place for several years now of Venezuelans moving to other countries. And this has been no exception to teachers and professors. So this means that the education institutions on the ground do not have enough teachers and professors to teach classes, especially problematic at a university level, where sometimes there are no careers available because there's not enough teachers to teach those classes, or students take a lot longer to finish their careers because they have to wait until a class opens up because there are no professors to teach that class. So it's very challenging. Another challenge that we've seen throughout these years is in infrastructure. Because of the economic situation of the country, a lot of institutions have not invested in their infrastructure, in their equipment. And so, because it's just too expensive, correct? So we also see as well that in a lot of these institutions, there's problems with thefts. So people come in and steal equipment. And so definitely just the physical infrastructure at schools is a problem as well, not ideal environment for learning. So those are some of the challenges that I wanted to highlight. Next slide. But then talking specifically about obstacles that exist for students that are interested in applying to US institutions. Again, just mentioning the logistical factors and the point that there is no electricity of internet connectivity for several days at a time sometimes makes it very, very challenging. But the most problematic aspect, I would say, is the access to credentials for students. Though this has improved recently, and students have access to credentials, what we are seeing or we're hearing from advisors is that students do have to wait a long time to get their credentials. And then this, of course, becomes an issue for their application deadlines. Sometimes we have also seen that there is a lack of printing material for official documentations. And so this makes it even harder for a student to get physical documentation of their credentials. We have heard from advisors that some cases of forging of documents. So this is definitely something that Education USA advisors monitor and work with students as well, making sure that the documentation is as official as it can be. Also worth mentioning as well is that institutions on the ground are not able to send materials directly to US counterparts. So a lot of credential evaluators or universities or community colleges require documentations to be sent directly to them from their local education institution. That is not an option in Venezuela. And so the best case scenario is for a student to obtain those physical documents and send them to the institution in the US. But as I mentioned, even the physical documentation can be problematic to obtain. Just briefly mentioning other challenges so that you're aware of. I mentioned here testing and other costs, but what I want to highlight is the problem of actually making payments online that Venezuelans have. So this doesn't only include testing products like TOEFLs and GREs and SATs, but any other payments that they have to do virtually. Because in order to do payments online to the US, you need to have a US dollar account. And not everybody has that, even though I would say now it's become more of a norm, but it's still an obstacle. And then even if you do have a US dollar account, there's also limits on how many transactions you can do a day or a week or a month. And so they have to be very careful because of a lot of restrictions that exists with Venezuela specifically. And so that's problematic. And then of course, people continue to earn their living in bolivares, the local currency, which is extremely devaluated and it's pretty much worth nothing. And everything else is dollarized. And so it's very expensive for a student to be able to afford a fee, for example, for a credential evaluator. And then finally, we do see problems with visas because there is no US embassy open right now in Caracas, so students have to travel abroad, which makes it, again, very expensive and cumbersome. Next slide. So what does Education USA do to help out? We, as I mentioned, work with students and just identifying different obstacles that they have and different questions and issues that we see and try to help them find solutions. We also work with the diaspora. So we're all over the region, all over the world, and we can help Venezuelan students that are not in Venezuela, and we do so quite often. We are also, and this is what I want to highlight, a great resource for you. We are there on the ground, making sure that we are understanding what's going on and we can give you updates on what we see on the ground and try to help you answer questions, for example, about an institution that you're not familiar with, some aspect of the education sector that it's not clear to you, and even sometimes about credentials. If you have a specific question and you need our help, we're happy to do that. We can do this because we do have very good connections with the local education institutions on the ground. So we pretty much know what is going on, and sometimes we can, connect with that specific institution to find the concrete answers that you're looking for. And we all advocate for the student. So we work and making sure that you understand what's going on with a specific case that we're working on. If the student, there's maybe some misunderstanding on what's going on, we can try to help connect and clear some issues that might be there. What you can do for Venezuelan students is really try to be as flexible as possible, especially with deadlines, and if possible, also with the requirements that you have, making, for example, available just online credentials and sending things via email will definitely be a lot easier for these students. You can also advocate with your leadership, explaining the situation, and we are happy to advocate with you if that's needed. And as I mentioned, just connect with us for more support. So next slide. I'm just going to leave you again with my email address and our Education USA website. And just to make sure that you know that you can contact us for any country that you're working with. And we're going to be talking about Ukraine. So definitely, if you have questions about Ukraine, we can help you navigate that as well. Thank you. Now we're going to, I'm going to pass it on to Dave, who's going to continue to talk about Venezuela in more specific details.
Thanks, Anna. Everything you said reflects the kind of things that we've been seeing here at ACRO. And we'll talk more about documentation and flexibility, as you suggested would be important. Mike, if we could go back up to the slide number 4, just for a brief whirlwind tour of the education system. As you can see on the right-hand side, there's a thumbnail sketch. I just want to go through these very quickly, and then we'll talk about the issues. So we start out, the system in Venezuela changed about 12, 13 years ago from a 9+2 elementary secondary system to basically a 6+5. It was 1 extra year for the secondary portion for the technical program. So you had a 6+6 or a 9+3 in the old system. So the credentials you're going to see in the secondary sector are the title of bachiller or the title of técnico medio. Técnico medio, it's important that the medio is there. That means, you know, basically secondary. That's how they refer to secondary education as educación media. But there is a higher technician, a superior technician at university level. So it's important to distinguish between those two. Moving to the post-secondary sector, we have a 2 to 3 year technical intermediate qualification. That's the title of técnico or technician. And it's important to note that you can get into university and higher technician programs with the Técnico Medio program from secondary school, as long as it's in a related field. You can't switch fields as easily, but you can still get access to post-secondary education with the technical credential. The normal first degree of licenciate or licenciado is going to be a 4 to 5 year sequence, depending on the field of study. We also have professional titles in fields such as law or engineering or architecture, basically any field where you would need to have some kind of a professional licensure credential. Those professional titles run from 5 to 6 years usually. There are some compressed calendars in Venezuela where people can do basically round the clock schooling, around the year schooling, and take summer terms and finish a 5-year program in 4 years sometimes. At the graduate level, we have a 1 year kind of a pre-master, a specialization program leading to the title of specialista. Master's degrees basically run 2 years in length. The master is known as the magister, and there are a limited number of doctorate programs called the doctorado. Those are a 3-year program after the magister in general. I haven't seen very many of those, and in general, I don't think they're very common. That basically covers the system as I want to do it, and we can move into the issues again by advancing to that first slide. So normally in an ideal situation, we would require printed original documents issued directly from the institution right to our offices. That would include the degree and the grade certificates and English translations, all of which had been available, you know, up until the early 2010s. But with first we had a severe economic crisis, and then COVID kind of piled on top of it. In any case, right now, we're seeing, I would say, increased availability of documents directly from universities. And as Anna mentioned, it is extremely expensive for the students to get these things sent. But during the pandemic, we saw a very few private universities were able to send official documentation on paper through a mail or courier service directly to an institution in the United States offices. Now we're seeing slightly more. Some of the autonomous public universities are able to send that documentation directly, but we had to become more flexible, especially in the situation of students in the United States who had fled the situation in Venezuela and were having difficulty. They certainly couldn't go back in person sometimes to get documents, and it was difficult for them to have the families get documentation also. In those cases, we were sometimes, we have a fairly large library of representative credentials, so we're able to compare credentials from various universities, and we were able to accept original documents in sealed envelopes that applicants had carried with them. We moved on to the pandemic. It made documentation even harder to procure for the applicants. And in that case, just as in anywhere else, people in Venezuela that worked at universities started working at home, and they were able sometimes to email official documentation, although still it was very difficult to get documentation directly from the universities. So I know that credential evaluators all over, regardless of where they worked, started considering taking electronic documentation from institutions in Venezuela. There are a few portals where you can verify. They exist at several universities where documents could be verified based on basically the identity card, cédula, it's called. And incidentally, that identity number, basically your ID number for a Venezuelan citizen, will appear on the secondary and post-secondary credentials. That's just something that you can always look out for. In cases of document alteration, that's one of the things that might be altered. So we'll move on to the next slide, please. And actually, I blew through this mostly, so we can move on to the document, if you would, slide 3 in that sequence. Thanks. Here we just have, this is not an evaluation session, but this is some sample documents, very representative of what you might see from some institutions. Oftentimes when you get a transcript from the university directly, you'll get one of these negative copies with the black background and white type. This happens to be for a law credential. And the document on the right, which is the certificate confirming that the degree act, took place and that the degree was legally awarded, should have all the pertinent information, including the exact date of award. We would consider either of these to be official. Next slide, please. So here we get to the resources section. This is a fluid situation day to day in Venezuela. Sometimes the ministry sites that we look to verify an institution's recognition or signatures on a document or whatever, sometimes it doesn't work. So many of the very useful electronic resources are ephemeral and are up sometimes and not up in other times. So if the Ministry of Education site, higher education site isn't loading, which is the case, today and in the recent past, we might go to the, so that would have been the third bullet point. We might go up one to the Consultative Council of Postgraduate, education. And this is a way of kind of doing an end around and catching institution information that we couldn't get because another site might have been down. Several evenings ago, I checked that site, which had been pretty reliable, and it was not working. So you're always having to fish for new ways to get sites. And by fish, I mean basically going onto the internet once you've exhausted your personal resources and printed resources and just starting to search. So I came up with the first resource listed here, which is from the National Council on Universities. And this happens to have the rectors all listed of universities. And so that's just, another kind of third source that's still an official government site that has the universities listed as they exist and in recognition in Venezuela. Many of you are familiar with the International Association of Universities database, or the WEHD, or HED rather, the ENIC NARC pages, NUFIC in the Netherlands. Any source you look at, depending on when it was published, may have information on universities that exist or existed. There was a spate of new higher institutions, higher education institutions developed in Venezuela in the recent past. And so that that just, sometimes the lists that exist online aren't up to date, and you just have to keep searching. The last slide, please. So here we have a continuation. The AcroEdge electronic database is a subscription database, but if you request one through the Acro website, we're glad to give you a 1-week trial to see what's in there. Sometimes the university will have their own website to verify credentials, as I mentioned before. You just basically have to look at each university and see if you can find that site. I threw in the NOCA refugee country briefing for Venezuela. This is a refugee specific outfit operating in Norway that has a lot of good information on various countries where we have asylum and refugee issues. And then, you can see in the print below, we don't have a lot of, certainly we don't have a current Venezuela book beyond the one that was published, I believe, last in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. But the NAFSA Guide to Educational Systems, is a good place to start always, along with the second one listed there. The thing I would leave you with is that always vet and pick your sources carefully. There are a lot of websites that aren't official that may have useful information. It's just necessary to triangulate and try to confirm that information someplace else rather than making a decision based on that. I am hopeful that the trend toward greater availability of credentials to students from Venezuela will continue. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tatiana McKenna from ECE in Milwaukee for the Ukraine session.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Give me just a second. Okay, so here you can see welcome to Ukraine part of my presentation on Ukraine. So
not quite yet. The screen isn't shared yet.
How do you do it? It's not showing. Okay, just a second. What about, does it show now?
It does, yes. Great job.
How do I go into my presenters? I don't see the presenters notes. I don't see the notes.
Or Tatiana, if you prefer, I can navigate through your slides until you have to get to the live verification.
Okay, let's do it. But okay, yeah. So in this part, I'm going to talk about the overview of the country, Ukraine, and I will talk a little bit about the overview of education, unfortunately without the credentials and the current state of education. I am a citizen of Ukraine. I've been living in the United States for 15 years. However, I never stopped. I have never stopped a connection with Ukraine, even for a minute. I was in touch with Ukraine via my relatives, via news, via watching what has been going in Ukraine since I left, and of course before that. So regarding Ukraine, where it is located, Ukraine is an Eastern European country. It's one of the largest countries of. So it's. Can you see the slide overview of Ukraine?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry, I apologize for the technical.
No worries, Tatiana.
Yes, so Ukraine is one of the largest after Russia country in Eastern Europe. It's quite big. It actually has the territory of France. It borders on Russia, Belarus, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, and two seas, the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. It's not a mono-national country. It has quite a lot of population representing different nationalities. Mostly Ukrainian speaking, predominantly Ukrainian speaking, mostly also Russian speaking in the east, south and north. Quite a lot of people of various nationalities, depending on the countries they border on. For instance, the part of Ukraine bordering on Poland, there will be people that will understand and speak Polish, Slovakia, Hungary, respectively. Historical context. History of Ukraine is quite complicated, and you can see that it goes all the way back to the 9th century. So definitely in the 9th century, the territory of Ukraine was not as it is known now. However, a lot of invaders that were going through the territory of Ukraine, lots of nationalities shaped what we see now. So we can see whatever happened in the 9th, 13th century, then going to 1917-21, Ukraine started shaping up as the country, as the state. Several parts of Ukraine were added, the north, east, south, west were added to the current territory of Ukraine. Unfortunately, bad changes started happening to Ukraine in 1986 with the explosion of Chernobyl disaster. So 1991, Ukraine became independent from the Soviet Union. Then we can see a lot of historical milestones and changes in Ukraine, such as the Orange Revolution, 2004. There were elections in 2007. That was the time when there were two presidents simultaneously functioning in Ukraine. 2014 was a huge date in the history of Ukraine, which we all remember as riots downtown Kiev, Euromaidan. Annexation of Crimea by Russia happened in the same year. Two rebel republics moved away from Ukraine, which is the Donetsk People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic. A lot of information you can hear in the news about Minsk agreements to end the war, but as far as I know, these Minsk agreements have never been signed. If they were signed back in 2014, most likely, maybe we wouldn't see what's happening right now in Ukraine. I'm sorry, I'm going back. Two most current recent events, tragic events that happened in Ukraine in 2022, that was February 21st, 2022, Russia recognized Lugansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republic. And several days later, we were all witnesses to what happened. The troops of Russia invaded the territory of Ukraine. I was actually watching the invasion practically live, watching the news, and I was definitely horrified to see what happened to the country in which I used to live, and which is still my motherland. Current map of Ukraine with military actions. I found this map to show you. So in red, you can see the military actions of Russia, and you can see the big cities such as Chernihiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, Lugansk, Donetsk, Mariupol, Kherson, Mykolaiv. So all these parts of Ukraine with big cities, they experienced extremely heavy military actions. Actually, the first day of the military operation, it's actually called by Russia the specialized military operation, which started on February 24th. Most military objects all over Ukraine, the territory of Ukraine, were shelled or bombed. And actually, my hometown, which is Vinnytsia, it experienced some bombing. So some brief notes that I put down for your information. On February 24th, martial law was implemented in Ukraine. What does it mean? It means that in the evening, people cannot go anywhere. Men aged 18 through 60 are not allowed to leave the country. Ukraine broke all diplomatic ties with Russia right following the military invasion. Naturally, there are a lot of casualties among civilians and military. I tried to find the the total number of people, at least among civilians, looking through Ukrainian resources, Russian resources, and other resources. Only in Western resources, I was able to find that according to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, they're talking about 925 civilian deaths during Russia's military attack on Ukraine as of March 20th. But naturally, this is not true. When you're watching the news, you can see the scope of destroyed cities, towns, villages, and you definitely understand that that's not 925 people that died. Right now, as I'm presenting, approximately 3 million refugees left Ukraine. Mostly they go to Western countries, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, then they go to Germany, Spain, Portugal. I don't know about the number of refugees that go to Western countries such as overseas like Canada, US, but most likely there will be some, of course, not as heavily because of the distance. And of course, there are a lot of besieged and bombed cities, towns, and villages that we see in the news every single day. Briefly, I will touch upon the educational system of Ukraine. So, educational system of Ukraine consists of secondary education in green, with the award of the certificate of primary education, certificate of basic secondary education, and certificate of complete general secondary education. As evaluators, we mostly deal with the certificate of basic secondary education, which signify completion of grade 9, and certificate of complete general secondary education, which is 2 years in duration and signifies compulsory completion of secondary education in Ukraine. Vocational credentials, it's the Diploma of Qualified Worker, Junior Specialist Diploma, which is currently being phased out. Higher education comprises Bachelor Diploma, Master Diploma, Specialist Diploma, which is currently being phased out, and the research level is Candidate of Sciences Diploma, Doctor of Philosophy, Doctor of Fine Arts Diploma, Doctor of Sciences Diploma. Unfortunately, in this presentation, I'm not including the credentials themselves. However, there will be the TISEP conference in April, I think 13th of April, where I will go in depth and into detailed analysis of all the credentials connected with the levels and with the qualifications that you can see on the chart. Also, I should mention that, of course, Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine, that's the old name actually on the slide. I apologize for that. But the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine is the main resource for any educational changes in Ukraine. And regarding this chart, ECE, the company where I work, has recently worked on the keys for the educational structure of Ukraine with in-depth analysis. So if you're interested, please feel free to visit The Connection, which is the official public social network of my company, in which a lot of people from all over the world, ministerial agencies, universities get together. This is an excellent platform to share your questions and inquiries, concerns regarding credentials, qualifications, institutions, grading scales. So this is the resource that we use daily in our work. Regarding Ukrainian universities, as of 2021, based on the resources from the Ministry of Education, there are over 130 higher educational institutions under the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine. These institutions are classical universities, academies, institutes, conservatories. I have actually included 10 institutions based on the current rating of the Ministry of Education of Ukraine. In red, you can see the rating internationally. So for instance, if Taras Shevchenko National University of Ukraine of Kiev will be #1 in Ukraine, internationally it will be number 35, which is not really that bad. The complete list of all the higher education institutions, including credentials from universities, academies, institutes, conservatories, specialized schools, you can find in the website of the Ministry of Education. If we have time, we will go live. I will go live with that. But all the higher education institutions, Zaklady Vyššої освіти, are linked to the Unified State Electronic Database on Education, or it's also known in Ukrainian as YEDEBO. So you can actually go into the link and you can search by city or by school. And documents stored in InfoResource. I apologize. Okay, so here I would like to go live and show the info resource. Is it possible or not? Okay, so info resource is the resource which we use in our work daily. It allows us to verify credentials of various levels, secondary, vocational, and higher credentials. If we have time, I would like to go live and verify my own credential, but unfortunately, not all credentials can be verified in InfoResource. And these are the credentials that are, so first of all, the credentials which can be verified. These are plastic diplomas from attestat to magister issued in 1998 to 2014. Custom format state issued diplomas that were issued up to 2015, ranging from attestat to magister. And diplomas issued to foreign students can already be verified since 2015. Documents which cannot be verified in InfoResource, diplomas issued prior to 1998, incomplete education, actually academic records, archival records, diplomas issued by military or internal affairs institutions cannot be verified in InfoResource, diplomas of retraining, research credentials such as diplomas for candidate of science degrees, diplomas issued to foreign students prior to 2015 cannot be verified in InfoResource, and any other diplomas not in plastic format which were issued between 1998 to 2014. Important changes.
Tiana,
Yes.
Tatiana, if you'd like to go live and do.
Yes, I would love to, definitely.
Go ahead. You have control of the screen. Go ahead and go to your tab.
Just a second. Okay, do you see it? Do you see the registry?
Yes,
Yeah, we can see
yes,
it.
perfect.
Fantastic, thank you so very much. I'm so happy you can see it. So here is where we typically verify credentials in InfoResource. This is the registry of documents on education. This is data of documents on education. And if you click here, you can see three variants, what you can verify. You can verify documents on higher education, you can verify documents on professional or professional technical education, and documents on general secondary education. Since I completed the higher education institution, I will click here. So actually I'll go back and I'll show you what you can do. You can go, so if you're going to verify vocational credentials, you can click on documents on the professional vocational education, and you will see the drop-down menu, diploma of qualified worker, and the certificate of awarding of the working qualification. If you click on the documents of general secondary education and you click here, you will see a lot of credentials, secondary credentials, ranging certificates of complete secondary education before 2019, after 2019, certificates of basic general education, and so on and so forth. So let's try and verify the certificate of higher education. So very important fact is that you have to be able to type in Cyrillic, especially in Ukrainian, but there are various routes to do that. You can use Google Translator, for instance, and type in Cyrillic and then just copy it. Okay, so I completed the specialist diploma, then I'm going to enter the serial number. According to my diploma, it's N. Then I will enter the number 627. Now the last name, it's obligatory. So my last name back then was Frolova. My name was, so I have it in my keyboard, I have the Ukrainian. And of course I have to enter my patronymic name. If I did not have patronymic name on the diploma, I would click actually here because it says that I'm confirming that there is no patronymic name. I can enter my date of birth. I cannot enter my date of birth. Let's say, stay away. I'm not going to enter my date of birth, but I will enter the captcha code S295. Okay, so here it's processing. The request is processing. And it says that I entered incorrectly, the symbols of the captcha code was entered incorrectly. I don't know why.
That doesn't seem possible.
Let's do it again. 5. Excellent.
There we go.
Simply fantastic. So this is what you will see if you entered everything correctly. If all the information matches the database. So this is the information from the Registry of Documents of Education of the Unified State Electronic Base on Education regarding the document of higher education. So first of all, you will see the document of the name of the documents. It's specialist diploma with honors. It's in English as well. You will see the registry number, actually, when I entered separately and this. Then you will see when the document was issued. Then you will see when I graduated from the credential, from this institution. You will see my name. The date of birth, I did not list the date of birth, but I mean, I could have listed, or it's not really that obligatory. This is the name of the institution, Vinnytsia State Pedagogical University, named after Mihailo Kotzebinski. Here, the information is about the qualification of the owner of the document regarding the level of higher education, specialty and specialization, educational program, and professional qualification. So what it says here is that I have received the qualification of the specialist in English language and literature and German language. The qualification, professional qualification, is the teacher of English language and literature and German language and the rector of the university. And then I just click in. So how do you go back to the presentation? I think I am back to the presentation.
You got it.
Excellent, fantastic.
Great.
So it's extremely important to mention that there were important changes in the system of education. And first of all, we will talk about secondary education. So you do know that currently the system of secondary education includes 11 years of education, 9 years for basic secondary education, and grades 10 through 11 for complete general secondary education. Starting since 2018 for primary education, and 2022 for basic secondary education, or for profile field specific secondary education 2027, you will, so these dates are listed here in connection with the implementation of the 12-year secondary education. So Ukraine is switching from 11 years of secondary education to 12 years. Regarding vocational education, per law on education of 2017, in Ukraine, the Ministry of Education is implementing dual system of education, which is actually modeled after the Swiss and German vocational system of education, according to which 30% of education is theory and 70% of education is practice. There will be changes in pre-higher education, which is professional, junior, bachelor credential. We have not seen it yet. There will be changes in short cycle higher education. So these are very basic information regarding the secondary education, regarding the vocational education, regarding the very important changes in Bologna compatible practices in higher education. In Ukraine, there are 3 cycle higher education degrees: bachelor, master, and PhD. So you do not see any junior specialist, you do not see the specialist, but instead you see these three important ones. Ministry of Education practically gave some of its work to the quality assurance agency, which is known as National Agency for Higher Education Quality Assurance. ECTS credits have been implemented, 30 ECTS credits per year. When we look at the diploma supplements in Ukraine, currently they are bilingual. We will see both the national system of assessment and also ECTS system of assessment with grading skills, of course. National qualifications framework was implemented in 2011, and the guidelines are being currently worked on, quality assurance in European higher education. Ukraine has been transitioning in education from 1991 to 2014. So we saw the credentials. So when we had the Soviet system of education, we basically saw the secondary credentials, vocational credentials, and specialist degrees, as well as candidate of science degrees. However, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there were important reforms. And according to those reforms, we see junior specialist, bachelor specialist, master candidate of science, and doctor of science. The transition of all these credentials has been going on after 2014, and we will see junior specialist moving. becoming junior bachelor. Again, we have not seen this credential. Bachelor is still bachelor. Specialist is going to be phased out and it will be known as master. Master will be known as master. Candidate of Sciences is going to be phased out and it will be Doctor of Philosophy and Doctor of Science. Extremely important information regarding the licensing and accreditation. If we look back at the educational history of Ukraine before the dissolution of the Soviet Union, before 1991, there was no such concept as licensing and accreditation because all the schools were centralized. And whenever we see the documents issued in Soviet times, they are de facto recognized because they were under the Ministry of Education located in Moscow. However, already starting in 1992, then 1996, the concept of licensing and accreditation was implemented in Ukraine. The main legislative body was the Ministry of Education and Science. Here we can see the transition of the Ministry of Education and Science into the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine with the attestation of highly qualified personnel licensing department. So the main idea behind these two tables that I have included is that even though there were levels of accreditation, institutional accreditations, levels 1 through 4, after 2014, the levels of accreditation being phased out, they are actually not existent anymore. So in other words, there will be no more institutional accreditation. However, there will be programmatic licensing, the licensing of programmatic activities and the licensing of programs. And if you go into the website of the Ministry of Education, you click on the list of institutions, you will be able to actually see the information about programmatic licensure and programmatic accreditation of programs in Ukraine. Current state of education. So we do know that there is military conflict in eastern Ukraine, which is called military operation, which started on the 24th of February. We do know that there is severe humanitarian catastrophe in many areas of Ukraine, specifically northeast, east, southeast areas. Schools were closed before the 14th of March. However, in the areas where there were no heavy military actions, the schools are functioning, but remotely. The schools are definitely not functioning in the areas which have massive destruction of cities, villages, towns, and so on and so forth. Regarding the verification of credentials, until practically last Friday, InfoResource was not working, so we were not able to access it. We were not able to access EDABO. However, a few days ago, InfoResource came back into functioning. I'm still not able to verify the apostille per ENIC Ukraine, so hopefully work will be resumed. We know that there are very severe economic sanctions imposed on Russia. We can see this from the news. So there are serious consequences for Russian science education scholars, students. Russia is experiencing severe international isolation in practically many spheres of life. Also, we know that Ukraine is going to stop cooperation with Russian Belarus in education. The main question is, how will schools and credentials from Ukrainian territories occupied by Russia be recognized? We will see this in the nearest future. Another huge issue is education in Crimea, Lugansk People's Republic, Donetsk People's Republic. So we do know that education in these areas is not recognized by the Ministry of Education of Ukraine, by mainland Ukraine, and internationally. Current state of education. So this is the map that was taken from the Ministry of Education of Ukraine. It's not working yet. However, based on the messages from the Ministry of Education, most likely a lot of information will be added into this map, and we will be able to see which schools have been destroyed, when, and so on and so forth. So currently, over 500 education institutions were damaged in Ukraine, which means that they cannot operate, the children cannot go to school and study as they used to before February 24th. This is information regarding the situation in education 2014-2022 in the Crimea and certain areas of the Donetsk and Lugansk regions. So some of the schools were evacuated into the mainland Ukraine. The others that stayed behind, they were not recognized. Naturally, they lost licenses and accreditation. The schools located in these two parts are not recognized by Ukraine. We have compiled a list of relocated institutions from Eastern Ukraine. So here you will see the new location, and you will see the name of the institution itself, both in English and in Ukrainian. And if you have any credentials, for instance, from the Donetsk National University issued after 2014, you will have to ask your students to go to Vinnytsia, and because this institution, part of this institution actually relocated to Vinnytsia. So the documents should be issued by Vinnytsia instead of Donetsk. Twin institutions is a very interesting phenomenon. What is meant by twin institutions? Some institutions stayed behind in Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics. Some institutions with basically the same names moved into other parts of Ukraine. So for instance, if you look at Lugansk State Medical University, you will see it's in Ukrainian, Lugansk Державний медичний університет. And if it's of course, so everything in green is recognized here. If you look in red, here it is, Lugansk State Medical University named after Saint Luka. It's in Russian. So the rule of thumb is if you go to the website of the schools and you see the name of the institution in Ukrainian with Ukrainian trident, with Ukrainian flag, especially with the Ministry of Education in Ukrainian, definitely the school is recognized. If you see the same institution with the same name, but in Russian, with the symbols of the DNR or LNR and Russian standards of education, definitely the school is not recognized. Glossary. So the glossary will be helpful for you if you do not speak or read Ukrainian. You will be able to check this short glossary and with the English counterparts. Some websites are extremely helpful websites for resources. We use number one, it's Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine. It works and it updates information in education daily. INIC Ukraine is my favorite website. I practically go there every single day and I look for information stored there. ECE Connection contains a lot of information on education. Educational System of Ukraine, I mentioned the chart. Educational System of Ukraine by National Information Center of Academic Mobility, INIC Ukraine, contains a lot of information. IPS, we used to use this website when we verified credentials prior to 2011. However, the database from Osvita was moved into InfoResource, so now we are using InfoResource for our resources. And additional resources, there are quite a lot of resources that you might definitely check. They're working. 25 years of transformations of higher education system in Ukraine with them. Chapter in Ukraine, INIC Ukraine, I cannot help recommending enough of it. Definitely law on higher education in Ukraine for 2014-2017. I published some articles in the TISAP resources. I would recommend NAFIC, Overview of Higher Education, World Data and Education by UNESCO. And thank you very much. Of course, I couldn't have covered all the information, but I'm looking forward to your questions regarding the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. We appreciate that. Let's go on to some questions. And I'm going to start with Anna, so you can catch your breath just a little bit, Tatiana, and water. Our first question is from an attendee who would like to ask you, Anna, their institution does allow applicants to submit official documents themselves rather than requiring them to be sent only by the institution. However, sometimes they have questions about credentials. And they'd like to know, how likely is it that they would receive a reply when emailing a Venezuelan institution with a verification question? And alternatively, should we send those questions to Education USA advisors in Venezuela if we don't receive or they don't receive a reply from the institution? Anna, could you answer that one for us?
Yes, of course. Well, as a generalization, I would say that it's unlikely that you will get a reply to an email. Maybe you have more luck if it's a private institution. But we have had several universities, US higher education institutions, ask for our help because they have contacted local education institutions with no luck. And we're happy to help you as much as we can. Of course, if it's a specific and individual case, the local institution is not going to give us a lot of information, but at least we can, you know, if we know somebody, we can give you that point of contact directly or find some way to support you. So yes, you can definitely contact Education USA. You can contact me with my email, and I will loop in the advisors in Venezuela so that we can help you.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Ana. Okay, I think this is actually for Dave. It says Mike, but I think this is for Dave. And the question is, how does a student, how are they able to obtain an official transcript or degree certificate if it is hard to get it from the institution?
That's a fair question. Oftentimes, students will have documents with them, but failing that, sometimes it's possible to have a relative obtain the document if the relative has the resources to actually be able to procure the document. There are fees involved, there are travel costs, right down to the amount of gas it might take to get to the institution. The institutions are able to send official documentation more and more. I think that's going to be the thing you want to rely on the most, is to see if the school can at least email documentation, if not send it via courier or regular post. I think that's really, you know, what you're looking at. There's a limit to what you can do. It's either up to the institution to send. Otherwise, you can try to see if the student is able to send documentation. And again, you're going to have to lean on your own internal policy as to whether you're going to accept the documentation from the student, depending on how it comes. You know, is it sealed in an envelope? Is it unsealed? Do you have examples to which you can compare it?
May I respond to this question too, from my perspective? So at ECE, we have the documentation requirements posted on ECE website. When you can actually check it, it's open for public. We require the photocopy of the diplomas issued after, I think, after 1998, 2000, because the diplomas can be verified in the InfoResource database. The diploma supplements or transcripts must be submitted as originals. We can also accept the original documents. So if the diploma is verified in InfoResource, we will accept the photocopy. Currently, because of the COVID situation in the world, pandemic, we started accepting photocopies of credentials from the schools, emailed directly from the schools to ECE. And we are trained to check the MIME information. So we will be able to find out if the documents were actually emailed from the school. So this route, so originals, emailed photocopies, sealed photocopies, sealed documents we can receive from the schools. However, I personally caught some fakes with sealed credentials. So that would be, I would be very, very cautious about that. So that was the situation before the 24th of February, 2022. What is going to happen now, nobody knows, because as I showed you on the map, there are a lot of cities that have been destroyed. So practically the schools were destroyed, tertiary schools. So I don't know what's going to happen now. However, there is a solution for that. The YEDABA, which is the Unified State Electronic Database on Education, is actually the organization that stores all the information about the students. Again, I may be wrong about the date, but possibly 2011. Again, I will have to double check that. However, the problem is that, not the problem, but the solution is that if you contact the YEDABO, you contact the Ministry of Education, they will be able to tell you that the student was actually enrolled. So YEDABO actually confirms the fact of study, enrollment, and study and completion of the institution. However, YEDABO does not verify the credentials authenticity. So this is the situation. I dealt with a lot of credentials from Eastern Ukraine. Before 2014, this is excellent. We can accept the credentials because they're acceptable. After 2014, if the credential was submitted from the DNR or LNR, we would ask the students to find the institution that were located to the mainland Ukraine and try to obtain the records from the relocated institution, or try to get in touch with the Ministry of Education. But again, it's impossible to confirm the authenticity of the transcripts from Eastern Ukraine. I mean, from the temporarily occupied territories, as is the correct name for DNR and LNR. So this is briefly our perspective.
Thank you, both of you. We are coming up to just about the end of our time. We have some great questions in the Q&A about specific Ukrainian credentials, but I'm going to move on because I think I'm going to address where those are going to be covered. I would like to thank ACRO for giving us 75 minutes rather than our typical 60 for this presentation, but I want to take you back into the last few slides that we're going to just go over quickly. And I believe in the meantime, Mike has shared the PowerPoint presentation with you. Mike, can you take us back to, yes, this is the one I'd like to point out. TISEP, the Association of International Credential Evaluation Professionals, has just confirmed that they are going to be doing an update on Ukraine with Tatiana, who is really going to go through the Ukrainian education systems, the credentials that we didn't have time to go through, as well as issues on verification and availability. That's April 13th. Things could certainly change by then. So please stay tuned, and there you can register in advance and by visiting the TISEP website. Next slide. Also, we are very busy here at ACRO getting ready for our annual meeting, which takes place April 3rd to the 6th in Portland, Oregon. If you haven't decided to join us, we hope you do. It should be a great event. There will be lots of topics covered, lots of international topics, and we are going to talk about crisis and displaced persons and at the international luncheon as well. I would encourage you, if you're coming, to please sign up for the international luncheon that will take place on Tuesday. That is a ticketed event. Next slide. Also, I just point out some of the resources we have on displaced and vulnerable students. Those will be available for you to look at and use in your daily work, as well as the webinars. And next slide. Also, we invite you to stay informed. We have QR codes for these, both the EDGE, to subscribe to EDGE, and for the International Activities Group. The International Activities Group is a great place to post questions, to have discussions, and to talk about topics like this that are coming up when you want to see what your colleagues are doing. And our final slide. On behalf of ECE, ACRO, and the U.S. Department of State, we'd like to thank you for coming, and Education USA, we'd like to thank you for being here and for taking the time out of your day to join us on this very important topic. We will continue to monitor things here at ACRO and to keep you informed. And we invite you to also go to our colleagues at Education USA, at ECE, at TISEP, and find out more information. Thank you all.
And somebody had asked previously for links to some of the other education and crisis webinars. I couldn't find all of them off the bat, but if you search ACRO, basically if you punch into your search bar what I'm about to enter into the chat.
Sorry, Mike, I cut
I can learn how to type. So if you just punch that into your search bar, then all of the relevant ones should show up. Lebanon, this one will show up.
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan, yep. So that'd probably be the fast way to do it, or you can go to the ACRO website and just punch in countries in crisis in the search bar.
Thanks all.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a
Thank
good
you.
afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.